I live alone, and for the most part, I enjoy the solitude. My small house is tucked away in a quiet neighborhood where everyone knows each other. My life is simple. I go to work, come home, and spend the evenings unwinding. I always keep the curtains slightly open at night. I like the cool air, and it makes me feel less shut off from the world outside. But now I realize how stupid that was. It started a few weeks ago. I woke up in the middle of the night, which isn't normal for me. At first, I thought maybe I was having a bad dream, but something felt wrong. It was like someone was watching me. I glanced at the window, but it was dark outside. Nothing seemed out of place, so I convinced myself it was just my imagination and went back to sleep. But I couldn't shake the feeling. The next morning, I noticed something strange. There were small footprints in the garden, just below my bedroom window. At first, I thought they might be from a cat or something, but they were too large and too defined. I didn't think much of it until I saw a cigarette butt near the same spot. I don't smoke. That's when I started to feel uneasy. Over the next few days, the sense of unease grew. Every time I came home from work, I felt like someone had been there. Nothing was missing, but things felt off. The feeling of being watched got worse, especially at night. I would lie in bed, trying to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing just outside the window, staring at me. I decided to set up a security camera. I figured if someone was really out there, the camera would catch them. But the footage showed nothing. Every morning I would check the recordings, only to find empty, silent nights. But the feeling didn't go away. In fact, it got worse. I started waking up multiple times during the night, convinced I'd heard something, a branch snapping, footsteps on the gravel outside, but there was never anything there. I was losing sleep, and with it, my peace of mind. I started to become paranoid during the day too. I felt eyes on me when I was outside, even when I was surrounded by people. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone watching me, but there was never anyone there. The worst part was the fear that whoever was doing this knew everything about me, my schedule, my habits, my vulnerabilities. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to do something. One night, I decided to set a trap. I pretended to go to bed as usual, but instead of sleeping, I stayed awake, clutching a flashlight and a kitchen knife under the covers. My heart pounded in my chest, and every little noise made me jump. I was determined to catch whoever it was, to finally end this nightmare. The hours dragged by, and just when I was about to give up, I heard it. Soft footsteps outside my window. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing. The footsteps stopped right by the window. I could hear someone's breath, heavy and slow, as if they were trying not to make a sound. My hand shook as I slowly reached for the flashlight. I had to know who it was. I had to see their face. I counted to 3 in my head. Then in one swift motion, I threw back the curtains and shined the light outside. I'll never forget what I saw. It was a face I recognized. It was my neighbor, the one who had always been friendly and kind, the one who always waved at me when I left for work. He was standing there, staring at me with a twisted smile. He didn't even flinch when the light hit him. He just stood there, like he had been caught in the act but didn't care. My blood ran cold. I felt sick to my stomach. "What the hell are you doing?" I managed to choke out, my voice trembling. He just smiled wider, that sick, twisted smile that made my skin crawl. "I've been watching you," he said, his voice low and calm, like we were having a normal conversation. "Every night. You're so peaceful when you sleep. It's the only time you're truly yourself." I felt like I was going to throw up. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He knew everything. When I went to bed, when I woke up, even the way I moved in my sleep. It was like he had been living my life right outside my window. "Why?" I whispered, barely able to speak. "Because I can," he said simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "And because you never noticed." He turned and walked away, just like that. I stood there, frozen, unable to move or even think. I wanted to call the police, to do something, but I couldn't bring myself to move. What would I even tell them? That my friendly neighbor had been watching me sleep? I spent the rest of the night sitting in the dark, knife still in my hand, staring at the window. I kept waiting for him to come back, to see that twisted smile again, but he didn't. I don't know what to do now. I can't sleep, I can't eat, I can't even think straight. I keep hearing his voice in my head, that calm, sick voice telling me how he's been watching me. I feel like he's still out there, somewhere, watching me even now. I don't think I'll ever feel safe again. I don't usually wake up in the middle of the night, but that night I did. Something outside my apartment was making a low, rumbling noise. It wasn't loud, but it was steady, like a car engine left running. Groggy, I got up and walked to the window. I live on the third floor of a small apartment building in a quiet neighborhood. It's not the kind of place where you expect to hear anything at 3 a.m. When I looked outside, I saw a van parked on the street. It was an old, unmarked white van, the kind you see in movies where something bad is about to happen. I remember thinking that it was strange for a van like that to be here so late. My curiosity got the better of me, and I kept watching. There were two people standing near the back of the van. They were lifting something, or someone, into it. I squinted, trying to see more clearly, but it was too dark. I told myself it could be nothing serious, maybe just someone moving furniture or dealing with a drunk friend. But deep down, I felt a chill. Something about the whole situation didn't feel right. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about the van. I went about my day as usual, but the image of those people loading what looked like an unconscious person into the back of that van kept creeping back into my mind. I even thought about calling the police, but what would I say? I didn't have any real proof that anything bad had happened. That night, I went to bed as usual, trying to put the weird incident out of my mind. But then, around the same time as the night before, I heard that same low rumbling noise. I froze. My heart started racing as I realized what it was. The van. It was back, and it sounded closer this time. Slowly, I got out of bed and walked to the window, feeling a tight knot of fear in my stomach. When I looked out, my worst fear was confirmed. The van was parked right outside my window. This time, the headlights were off, and the street was dark. But I could make out shadows moving inside the van. It was as if they were waiting for something, or someone. My mind started racing. Why was the van back? Were they watching me? Did they know I saw them last night? For the next few days, the van kept appearing. Sometimes it was in the middle of the night, sometimes during the day, but always near my apartment. I started noticing other strange things too. My mail was left half open, and I began receiving calls with nothing but silence on the other end. Each time, I felt more and more isolated. I tried telling a friend, but they just laughed it off, saying I was being paranoid. But I knew what I saw. I knew that something was wrong. One night, the van didn't just park outside. I heard it pull up again, but this time, there was a new sound. Footsteps in the hallway outside my door. My heart pounded in my chest as I heard the slow, deliberate steps stop right outside my apartment. Then, I heard the faint sound of someone trying to unlock my door. Panic surged through me. Someone was trying to get in. I ran to the door and pushed a chair under the handle, my hands shaking as I did. The sound outside grew louder, more insistent. It was like they were trying different keys, trying to find the right one. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I heard the footsteps retreat down the hall, followed by the sound of the van's engine roaring to life and driving away. I stood there, shaking, unable to move. Whoever it was, they were gone. But the fear stayed. I knew this wasn't over. The next morning, I called the police. They came, but found nothing. No sign of a break-in, no evidence that anyone had tried to get in. The van was nowhere to be found. The police officer looked at me like I was crazy, suggesting maybe it was just a prank or that I imagined the whole thing. But I knew what I heard, what I saw. After that, I did everything I could to protect myself. I installed new locks, set up cameras, anything to feel safer. But every time I checked the footage, there was nothing. No van, no people, nothing out of the ordinary. I started questioning myself, wondering if maybe the police were right. Maybe I was just paranoid. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Weeks passed, and slowly I started to relax. The van didn't come back, and I began to think that maybe it really was just a bad dream. But then, one morning, I found a letter in my mailbox. There was no return address, just an envelope with my name on it. Inside was a single photograph. It was a picture of me, taken while I was sleeping. My heart stopped as I realized what this meant. Someone had been inside my apartment. Someone had been watching me. As I stared at the photo, I heard it again. The low rumble of an engine outside. I didn't need to look to know what it was. The van was back, and I knew this nightmare was far from over. I found a new apartment close to my college. It was cheap, small, and not very pretty, but it was perfect for me. I didn't have much money, so when I found this place, I thought I was lucky. The building was old, the walls a bit thin, but it was quiet. The neighbors didn't bother me, and I rarely saw anyone in the hallways. The first few days were fine. I unpacked, set up my desk, and got used to the place. But I started to notice something strange about the hallway outside my door. It was always dark, like the light was never strong enough to reach it, even in the daytime. I didn't think much of it at first. It's an old building, I told myself. It's probably just how things are. Then, one night, while I was up late studying, I heard footsteps. It was almost midnight, and everything was quiet until I heard them. Slow, steady footsteps, like someone was walking very deliberately. They started from the end of the hallway near the stairs, and they got louder as they came closer to my door. The sound made me freeze. I stopped typing and just listened. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I waited for a knock, for something, but there was nothing, just silence. I got up slowly and walked to the door. My heart was racing. I put my eye to the peephole, expecting to see someone there, but the hallway was empty. The same dark, empty hallway. I waited a few minutes, but the footsteps didn't come back. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just a neighbor passing by, but the feeling that something was wrong stuck with me. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same footsteps. They started from the stairs and stopped right outside my door. Again, I looked through the peephole, and again, nothing. No one was there. I started to get scared. I didn't know what to do. I thought about asking the neighbors if they had heard anything, but I didn't want to seem crazy. Maybe it was just my imagination, but it wasn't. The footsteps came back every night, always at the same time. I started to dread the nights. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on my studies. All I could think about were those footsteps. Who was it? Why did they stop at my door? The fear started to take over my life. I couldn't concentrate in class, couldn't enjoy anything. I was always tired, always anxious, waiting for night to come so I could hear those footsteps again. One day, I decided to ask a neighbor. I caught an older woman who lived down the hall as she was getting her mail. I asked her if she had heard anything strange at night, any footsteps. She just looked at me like I was crazy and shook her head. "No, dear," she said. "This place is as quiet as a grave." Her words didn't comfort me. If anything, they made me feel worse. I started to think that maybe I was losing my mind. But every night the footsteps came back, regular as clockwork. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know who was out there, why they were doing this to me. I decided that the next time I heard the footsteps, I would open the door. That night, I sat on my bed, waiting. My heart was pounding in my chest. I could barely breathe. I kept looking at the clock, watching the minutes tick by. Then, just like every other night, I heard the footsteps. They started from the stairs and came closer, closer, until they stopped right outside my door. My whole body was shaking as I got up and walked to the door. I stood there for a moment, my hand on the doorknob, too scared to turn it. But I had to know. I had to. I opened the door, just a crack, and peered out. The hallway was empty, just like always. But then I noticed something on the floor, right in front of my door. It was small and dark, hard to see in the dim light. I opened the door wider and stepped out. It was a piece of paper folded up neatly. My hand trembled as I picked it up and unfolded it. There was nothing written on the paper, but inside there was something small, something that made my blood run cold. It was a key, not a normal key, but one that looked just like the one I used for my apartment. My first thought was that maybe I had dropped it, but no, my key was in my pocket. I stared at the key, my mind racing. Who had left it here? What did it mean? I stood there for what felt like hours, just holding the key, my mind spinning with fear and confusion. Then, slowly, I started to realize something. The footsteps weren't just in my head. Someone was out there, and they wanted me to know they could get into my apartment anytime they wanted. I went back inside, locked the door, and put the chain on. I sat down on the floor, staring at the key. I didn't know what to do. I thought about calling the police, but what would I tell them? That someone was leaving keys outside my door? They would think I was crazy. Maybe I was. The footsteps haven't stopped. Every night they come, always at the same time, always stopping outside my door. I don't know what they want, who they are. I'm too scared to open the door again. I've thought about moving, but I can't afford it. I'm stuck here, waiting, every night, for those footsteps to come. I don't know how much longer I can take this. Whoever it is, they're still out there, and they know where I live. And every night, they're getting closer. I live in a small, quiet town, the kind where nothing much happens. It's just me and my son, Jamie. Our days are simple. I take him to school, go to work, and then come home to make dinner. Our routine is the same every day, and that's how I like it. I've always been a bit of a worrier, but lately, I've been feeling something more, a kind of unease. It's hard to explain, but every night after I put Jamie to bed, I feel like someone is watching me. It started a few weeks ago. I woke up in the middle of the night, exactly at midnight, to a loud knock on the front door. My heart raced as I sat up in bed, straining to listen. At first, I thought I must have imagined it. Who would be knocking at my door at this hour? But the knock came again, louder this time, more urgent. I got out of bed and tiptoed to the door, trying not to wake Jamie. I looked through the peephole, but there was no one there. My hand hovered over the door handle, but something inside me screamed not to open it. I backed away and went back to bed, telling myself it was just a dream. The next night, it happened again. The same loud knock at midnight. This time, I was more scared. I didn't even get out of bed. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to stop. When morning came, I checked the front porch, but there was nothing there, no sign that anyone had been at my door. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind, but the knocking kept coming, night after night. It got worse. The knocking grew louder, more aggressive, as if someone was pounding on the door with both fists. I was too afraid to open the door or even look through the peephole again. Every night I would lie in bed, heart pounding, waiting for the knocking to stop. I barely slept, and when I did, I had nightmares. I started to dread the nighttime, knowing that the knocking would come at midnight, like clockwork. I decided to install a doorbell camera. I needed to know what was happening, who was doing this to me. The first night after the camera was up, I lay in bed, phone in hand, waiting for the knock. When it came, my hands shook as I opened the camera app. What I saw on the screen made my blood run cold. It was me. The person standing at my door, pounding on it with such fury, looked exactly like me. Same hair, same clothes, same face. I couldn't breathe. I watched as the figure banged on the door, over and over, then suddenly stopped. It turned its head, looking directly at the camera, and I felt like it was looking straight into my soul. I dropped the phone, my body shaking uncontrollably. What was I seeing? Was this some kind of sick joke? I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat on the couch, watching the door, waiting for the next knock. When morning came, I reviewed the footage again, hoping I had imagined it, but the video was clear. The person outside my door was me. I replayed the video over and over, trying to make sense of it, but nothing did. My mind raced with questions, but I had no answers. How could this be possible? Was I losing my mind? I couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? I barely believed it myself. I started to avoid going out, terrified that I might see that figure again. I didn't want to run into myself on the street, didn't want to know what would happen if I did. The knocking kept coming every night, and every night I would check the camera and see my own face staring back at me. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping. I was falling apart. Finally, one night, the knocking didn't come. I lay in bed, waiting for it, but the house was silent. I should have felt relieved, but instead, I felt more afraid than ever. I got up and checked the camera just to be sure. The figure was there, but something was different this time. Instead of pounding on the door, it was just standing there, looking at the camera with a strange smile on its face. And then it turned and walked away. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. Where was it going? What did it want? I watched as the figure disappeared from view, and for a moment I felt a strange sense of calm. Maybe it was over. Maybe it was finally done with me. But then, the door slowly creaked open. I hadn't touched it, hadn't unlocked it, but it was opening on its own. I froze, staring at the door as it swung open wider and wider. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what was happening. The figure hadn't gone away. It was inviting me in. I wanted to scream, wanted to run, but I couldn't move. I could only watch as the door opened, revealing nothing but darkness beyond it. I knew, deep down, that if I stepped through that door, I would never come back. But at the same time, I felt a strange pull, a desire to walk through and see what was on the other side. The last thing I remember is stepping forward, one foot in front of the other, moving toward the open door. I don't know what happened after that. I don't remember anything else. All I know is that when I woke up, I was lying in bed, the door closed, the house silent. But I wasn't the same person anymore. Something had changed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the person who walked through that door wasn't really me. Now, every night at midnight, I wait for the knock, knowing that one day it will come again. And when it does, I don't know if I'll be able to resist answering it. I was exhausted, the kind of tired that makes you collapse on the couch without even thinking about it. That's what happened to me last night. It was a long day at work, and all I wanted was to lie down for a few minutes. I didn't even make it to my bed. I just dropped onto the couch, not caring about the shoes I hadn't taken off or the light still on in the hallway. It felt safe. My small, quiet apartment. Nothing ever happened here. It was just me and my simple routine. Nothing strange, nothing out of place. I must have fallen asleep pretty quickly because the next thing I knew, I was waking up in the dark. But something wasn't right. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like a weight was pressing down on it, and my throat was so tight, it was like I was choking on nothing. At first, I thought it was just a bad dream. You know, the kind that feels so real it takes a moment to shake off. But this wasn't going away. I was wide awake, and the pressure on my chest wasn't letting up. I tried to calm myself, taking slow breaths, telling myself it was just a panic attack or something. But then I heard it. Breathing. Not my own. This was different. It was slow, heavy, and it was coming from somewhere close. Too close. My heart started racing, pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I froze, listening. At first, I thought it was just the echoes of my own breath, bouncing around the room. But then I realized the sound was coming from below me, from under the bed. I lay there, trying to convince myself that I was imagining it, that it was all in my head. But the more I listened, the clearer it became. Someone was under my bed. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. My body went cold, and I felt like I might throw up. What was I supposed to do? If I moved, if I made any noise, whoever was down there might do something bad. I didn't want to think about what that might be. My phone was on the nightstand, just out of reach. I knew I needed to get to it, but every muscle in my body was tense, locked in place by fear. I didn't dare move, not yet. I needed to think, to figure out what to do next. Maybe if I stayed quiet, they would leave. Maybe it was just some homeless guy who had snuck in, thinking the apartment was empty. That's what I tried to tell myself, even though I knew it was a weak lie. Minutes passed, or maybe it was seconds. Time seemed to stretch out, each breath taking forever. I finally decided I couldn't just lie there. I had to do something. Slowly, as quietly as I could, I started to reach for my phone. My hand shook, and I bit my lip to keep from making any sound. The last thing I wanted was to let them know I was awake, that I knew they were there. Just as I was about to grab the phone, a noise stopped me cold. The breathing had changed, quicker, almost like whoever was down there was getting nervous too. Then, I felt a shift in the mattress, like they were moving around. My mind went blank with fear. I didn't want to see them, didn't want to know what kind of person hides under someone's bed in the middle of the night. But I had to know. I had to see if this was real or just some messed up nightmare. With every ounce of courage I could muster, I leaned over the edge of the bed, my phone gripped tight in my hand. I aimed the screen down, lighting up the darkness under the bed. What I saw made my blood turn to ice. There was a man under my bed. He was lying on his side, facing me, his eyes wide open, staring right at me. His face was dirty, covered in grime, and his clothes were torn, like he'd been living on the streets for a long time. But what scared me the most was the look in his eyes. Wild, desperate, like a cornered animal. He didn't say anything, just kept staring at me, breathing heavy, his chest rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths. I didn't know what to do. My mind was screaming at me to run, to get out of there, but my body wouldn't move. I was frozen, locked in place by the terror of what might happen if I made a wrong move. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, my whole body shaking with fear. Then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, he spoke. It was barely a whisper, so quiet I almost didn't hear it. But the words cut through the silence like a knife. "He's in the closet." At first, I didn't understand. I thought maybe he was talking to me, trying to scare me even more. But then it hit me. He wasn't alone. There was someone else here, in my apartment, in my closet. My eyes darted to the closet door, and I saw that it was slightly open, just a crack. I hadn't left it like that. I knew I hadn't. It was closed when I went to bed. I was sure of it. Panic surged through me, a wave of cold fear that made my whole body go numb. I didn't know what to do, where to run. I was trapped between the man under my bed and whatever was waiting for me in the closet. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how to get out of this alive. But no matter what I thought of, it all ended the same way. With me either dead or worse. I stayed there, paralyzed, not daring to move, not even daring to breathe too loudly. The man under the bed didn't say anything else. He just kept watching me, like he was waiting for something. The closet door didn't move, but I could feel something behind it, something waiting for the right moment to strike. I don't know how long I stayed like that, too scared to do anything. It could have been minutes, hours, I don't know. But eventually, I heard something from the closet, a soft click, like the sound of a door latch being slowly turned. I wanted to scream, to get up and run, but my body wouldn't listen. All I could do was lie there, waiting for whatever was going to happen next. And that's where I am now, still lying here, still too scared to move, knowing that no matter what I do, I'm not getting out of this. Not alive, anyway. I've always liked living alone. It's quiet, peaceful, and I don't have to worry about anyone else's mess. But lately, things have changed. I don't know when I first noticed it, but there's been a feeling I can't shake off, like something is not right in my apartment. It's hard to explain, but there's this heaviness in the air, especially at night. I try to tell myself it's just my imagination, that I'm being paranoid, but every night it gets worse. It started with small things. At first, I'd hear little creaks and thumps. Normal apartment sounds, I thought. It's an old building after all. The pipes make noise, the wood creaks, and maybe my neighbors are just moving around late at night. I tried to ignore it, but I kept feeling this growing unease, like I wasn't really alone. I'd lie in bed, listening to the sounds, my heart beating faster than it should. I'd convince myself it was nothing, just nerves or stress from work, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. One night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard it clearly, a thud coming from the closet. My eyes snapped open and I lay there holding my breath. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable, like something or someone had knocked against the wall inside. My first thought was that something fell over, maybe a shoe or a coat hanger. But as I lay there, waiting for it to happen again, my heart started pounding. I wanted to get up and check, but fear rooted me to the bed. Instead, I pulled the covers up, closed my eyes, and told myself to stop being ridiculous. But the next night, it happened again. Another thud, followed by a rustling sound, like something moving around. I couldn't ignore it anymore. My hands were shaking as I turned on the bedside lamp, casting long shadows across the room. I stared at the closet door, half expecting it to swing open on its own. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just scaring myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The nights that followed were worse. The noises became more frequent, sometimes louder, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. I started dreading going to bed, knowing I wouldn't sleep. Every time I heard something, my mind would race with terrible thoughts. What if there was someone in there, hiding, waiting? I didn't want to believe it, but the fear was taking over. I stopped sleeping well, constantly waking up to the sounds that seemed to come from the closet. I tried to rationalize it, thinking maybe it was a mouse or some kind of animal that had gotten in. But then I thought, how would an animal even get into my closet? And if it was a mouse, wouldn't I hear it scurrying around all the time, not just at night? These questions swirled in my mind, making it impossible to rest. Finally, after almost a week of this, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was making those noises. One night, when the thudding started again, I decided I would open the closet. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I got out of bed, slowly, like I was trying not to wake something. Every step felt like a struggle, my legs heavy and unwilling. I reached the closet door, my hand trembling as I grabbed the doorknob. I stood there for what felt like hours, trying to gather the courage to open it. 1,000 thoughts ran through my head. What if I found something terrible in there? What if I didn't? But I couldn't live like this anymore. I had to know. I turned the knob and pulled the door open. At first, there was nothing, just clothes hanging, the usual mess of shoes and bags on the floor. I almost laughed at myself, feeling foolish for being so scared. But then, I noticed something odd. Pushed to the back of the closet, hidden behind my winter coats, was a small pile of blankets. My stomach dropped. I didn't put those there. My mind raced as I reached out, moving the coats aside. That's when I saw it. A half-eaten sandwich, a bottle of water, and a dirty pair of socks that definitely weren't mine. My head started spinning as the reality of what I was seeing sank in. Someone had been living in my closet. All this time, I thought I was alone, but I wasn't. Panic surged through me and I stumbled back, almost tripping over my own feet. I needed to get out of there, to call someone, but my body felt frozen with fear. My eyes darted around the room, as if expecting to see someone watching me. Then I heard it, a creak behind me. Slowly, I turned around, my breath catching in my throat. Standing in the doorway of my bedroom was a man. He was tall, with dark eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. He didn't say anything, just stared at me, his expression unreadable. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't do anything but stand there, trapped in my own fear. Everything after that is a blur. I don't remember how I got out of the apartment or how I managed to call the police. All I know is that when they arrived, the man was gone, and so was the stuff in my closet. They told me there was no sign of forced entry, nothing to prove anyone had been there at all. But I know what I saw, what I felt, and now, every time I hear a noise, I can't help but wonder, what if he comes back? I found out about the sleep study through a flyer at work. It was simple, just a white piece of paper with bold black letters. Need better sleep? Join our study. Get paid. It seemed perfect. I'd been having trouble sleeping for weeks, maybe months. My job was stressful, long hours in front of a screen, and I was always tired. So the idea of getting help while making some extra money sounded like a win-win. The clinic looked professional, clean, white walls, people in lab coats with polite smiles. They explained that they were studying sleep patterns to help improve treatments for insomnia. It sounded harmless, even helpful. I signed the papers without reading much of the fine print, trusting that they were who they said they were. The first night was when things started to feel off. They put me in a small windowless room with a bed and some strange machines. I expected them to hook me up and let me sleep, but instead, they said they needed to do some preliminary tests before the actual sleep study could begin. I didn't think much of it at the time. The tests started easy enough, bright lights flashing in my eyes, the room suddenly turning cold with blasts of air, then loud, harsh noises playing from hidden speakers. It was uncomfortable, but I told myself it was part of the process. It would be over soon, and I'd get to sleep. But they didn't let me sleep. Hours passed, and the tests continued. By the time they finally stopped, I was too wired to sleep, even if they had let me. They brought me back to the main area in the early morning, handed me some coffee, and said the real study would start that night. They told me I did well, like I had passed some test. I smiled weakly and left, already dreading coming back. The second night was worse, much worse. When I arrived, they told me I'd be restrained for the study. For your own safety, they said. The restraints were tight, keeping me flat on the bed, unable to move. They started playing sounds, crying, screaming, strange animalistic noises. I tried to close my eyes, but a nurse came in, prying them open with cold metal clamps. It was unbearable. I screamed for them to stop, but they ignored me, saying it was all part of the study, part of collecting the data. Just relax, one of them said with a smile that looked more like a sneer. But how could I relax? Time lost meaning. I don't know how long I lay there, listening to those horrible sounds, unable to move or even close my eyes. I kept trying to reason with them, begging them to let me go, but they just scribbled notes, observing like I was some kind of animal. When they finally released me, my muscles were cramped and sore, my mind a jumbled mess. They told me to go home and rest, but how could I rest after that? The third night, I didn't want to go back. I thought about running, just leaving town and forgetting the whole thing. But I needed the money. And part of me thought maybe it would be easier this time, that maybe I was just overreacting. I was wrong. From the moment I walked into the clinic, I knew something was wrong. The way they looked at me was different, colder, more calculating. They strapped me down again, but this time, the restraints were even tighter. I could feel my pulse in my wrist, the blood struggling to circulate. They started the sounds immediately, louder than before, more disturbing. And then the hallucinations began. At first, it was just shadows in the corners of the room, shifting shapes that seemed to grow and shrink as I stared at them. But soon, the shadows took on forms, faces with sharp teeth, eyes that seemed to glow with malice. They whispered things I couldn't understand, but the tone was enough to fill me with dread. I tried to tell myself it wasn't real, just tricks of my exhausted mind. But it felt so real. And the researchers, their smiles had twisted into something sinister, their voices hollow and cold. "We're almost done," they kept saying, but it felt like a lie. I started to think that maybe they weren't researchers at all, that maybe this wasn't about sleep. Maybe it was about something much darker. I wanted to get up, to run, but I was too weak, too tired, and the restraints wouldn't let me. Then, in a moment of clarity, I overheard them talking. They were just outside the door, their voices low but clear enough to hear. "He's holding up better than the last one said. "We need to push further," another replied. "We're getting valuable data here." My heart sank. I realized then that this wasn't a sleep study. It never was. They were experimenting on me, testing the limits of sleep deprivation, watching what it did to my mind and body. I was just another subject, another number in their sick experiment. Finally, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, they ended the experiment. Just like that, they unstrapped me, handed me my clothes, and told me I was free to go. I was too stunned to react, my mind too shattered to question them. I stumbled out of the clinic, the cold night air hitting my face like a slap. Everything felt distant, like I was watching someone else walk down the street, someone else fumble with their keys and drive home. But home didn't feel safe. Nothing felt safe anymore. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I heard those sounds again, saw those faces in the shadows. It's been days now, and I still can't sleep. Every time I lie down, my heart races, and I start to hear those whispers again. I don't know what they did to me, but I can't shake the feeling that they broke something inside me, something that can't be fixed. I don't know if I'll ever sleep again, and the thought of closing my eyes terrifies me. What if I never wake up? What if the experiment never really ended? I woke up in complete darkness. At first, I thought it was just another bad dream, one of those nightmares that leave you feeling lost and cold. But this was different. When I reached out to touch the walls, they were real, solid, and much too close. Panic began to rise in my chest as I realized I had no idea where I was or how I got here. The last thing I remembered was falling asleep in my bed, and now I was in this small, strange room. There were no windows, just four cold walls surrounding me. I fumbled around, my hands shaking as they moved over the rough surface of the walls. No light, no sign of anything familiar. Only one door, and it was locked. The silence was heavy, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. My heart pounded as I tried to calm myself, telling myself over and over that I needed to stay calm, needed to think. But thinking was hard. The room was so small, so tight, like it was closing in on me. I searched every inch, hoping to find something, anything that would help me understand. But the room was empty. Completely empty except for the faint smell of something burnt that lingered in the air. That smell made me feel sick, though I couldn't say why. My hands brushed against something on the wall, rough like scratches, and I froze, my mind racing. Someone else had been here before me. Someone who had tried to escape. I moved to the door, pressing my ear against it. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this was some kind of mistake. I thought maybe someone would come, someone who could explain all of this, open the door and let me out. But when I pressed my ear closer, I heard them. Voices, soft at first, like they were far away. I strained to hear, hoping they were coming to help me. But the more I listened, the more I realized they were talking about me. The words were muffled, but I could make out enough to know they were planning something, and whatever it was not good. My blood ran cold. They spoke about me like I was just some object, like I wasn't even a person. They knew things about me, things they shouldn't know. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to remember if I had seen anyone suspicious before this, someone who could have been watching me. But nothing made sense. The room felt even smaller now, like the walls were closing in, and I couldn't stop thinking about those voices. They weren't going to help me. They were going to hurt me. My thoughts raced back to those scratches on the wall, the smell of something burnt. How many others had been here before me? And what had happened to them? I had to get out. I couldn't just sit there and wait for whatever they had planned. My hands trembled as I pushed against the door, desperate to find some way to open it. I tried everything I could think of, ramming my shoulder into it, kicking it, even trying to pick the lock with the small metal button on my jeans. But nothing worked. The door didn't budge, and the voices outside were getting louder. They were coming closer. I screamed for help, even though deep down I knew it was useless. I screamed until my throat burned, but no one answered. The only sound was the steady thump of footsteps approaching the door. I could hear them now, just outside. My breath caught in my throat, and I backed away, feeling the cold wall press against my back. This was it. They were going to come in, and I didn't know what they were going to do, but I knew it wasn't going to be good. I had one last chance. In a final, desperate move, I threw myself against the door with all my strength. I expected it to resist like before, but instead, it swung open so suddenly that I almost fell through. For a brief moment, I thought I was free. But as I stumbled into the next room, I realized with horror that it was identical to the one I had just left. The same cold walls, the same locked door, the same sickening smell of burnt something lingering in the air. I turned to run back through the door I had come through, but it slammed shut behind me with a loud final bang. My heart sank, and I felt the last bits of hope drain away. I was trapped again, in the same nightmare, only now I knew there was no escape. The voices started again, louder this time, and I could hear the cold laughter mixed in with their words. They were toying with me, and I realized with a sickening dread that this wasn't just a mistake or a random kidnapping. This was a game to them, a cruel game that I had no way of winning. As I stood there, feeling the weight of the situation press down on me, I knew one thing for sure. My nightmare was far from over. It had only just begun. I had been working late, exhausted after another long day in the office. All I wanted was to get home and fall into bed. When I finally stepped out of the building, the night air was cool and the city lights felt distant, like I was moving through a dream. I spotted a taxi parked near the curb and hurried over, too tired to care much about anything else. I just wanted to be home. The driver nodded as I gave him my address, and I sank into the back seat. My eyelids were heavy, and I couldn't help but let them close. The hum of the engine, the soft, repetitive noise of the tires against the road, it all lulled me into a deep sleep. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was the quiet. The city noise was gone, replaced by an eerie silence. I sat up, confused, and looked around. The familiar streets of the city had disappeared. Instead, the taxi was speeding down a dark, narrow road, surrounded by nothing but trees and shadows. My heart started to race. "Where are we?" I asked the driver, my voice trembling slightly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he kept his eyes on the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. I repeated the question, louder this time, trying to hide the panic that was creeping into my voice. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his expression blank. "Shortcut," he said, his tone flat and cold. Something was wrong. I knew it. I didn't remember any shortcuts like this on my usual route home. I tried to stay calm, to think clearly, but my mind was racing. "This isn't right," I said, trying to sound firm. "Turn around and take me back." He ignored me again, his foot pressing harder on the gas pedal. The trees outside blurred as we sped up, and my fear turned into pure panic. I reached for my phone, hoping to call someone, anyone, but there was no signal. The screen mocked me with the words "no service" at the top. My heart pounded in my chest, the reality of the situation sinking in. I was trapped. "Stop the car," I demanded, but the words came out shaky, more like a plea than an order. He didn't even flinch. I could see the tension in his knuckles, white against the steering wheel, as if he was holding on to something more than just the car. I didn't know what to do. My thoughts were a jumbled mess of fear and desperation. I thought about jumping out of the car, but we were going too fast. I tried to think of something, anything, to get out of this situation. I considered grabbing the steering wheel, but the doors were locked and the child safety lock was on. My options were running out. Then I had an idea. It was risky, but I was out of choices. I took a deep breath and forced myself to sound calm. "Look," I said, my voice softer, almost pleading now. "I can pay you more. Just please, take me back. We can forget this happened." For a moment, I thought I saw something in his eyes. Hesitation, maybe. But it was gone as quickly as it came. He didn't slow down. If anything, the car seemed to speed up, the road ahead narrowing into a dark tunnel of trees. Time passed in a blur. I don't know how long we drove, but each minute felt like an eternity. My mind was racing, every instinct telling me to find a way out. But there was no way out, not as long as he was in control. And then, just as suddenly as the nightmare had begun, it stopped. The car slowed down, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. My breath caught in my throat as the driver pulled over to the side of the road and turned off the engine. The silence was deafening. "Get out," he said, his voice low and emotionless. I stared at him, unsure if I had heard him correctly. My heart was pounding so loudly in my chest that it drowned out all other sounds. He turned to look at me, his face blank, but his eyes. There was something in them, something I couldn't understand. I said, "Get out." I hesitated for just a second, fear holding me in place. But then I scrambled for the door handle, my hands shaking. The door unlocked, and I stumbled out of the car, my legs unsteady beneath me. I expected him to do something, drive away, grab me, anything, but he just sat there, watching me with that same unreadable expression. The car door slammed shut behind me, and the sound echoed through the night. Then, without another word, he sped off, leaving me alone on the side of the road. I stood there breathing hard, my mind trying to make sense of what had just happened. The darkness around me was thick, pressing in from all sides. The only light came from a small town in the distance, just barely visible through the trees. I had no idea where I was, but I knew I had to get out of there. I started walking, my legs shaking with every step. It took me what felt like hours to reach the town, though it was probably only a few minutes. The streets were deserted, the houses dark and silent. I found a small gas station, the lights inside flickering dimly. The attendant gave me a strange look as I walked in, disheveled and out of breath. But I didn't care. I was safe, at least for now. But the terror of that night never left me. I didn't know who that driver was, what he wanted, or why he let me go. I still don't. The memory of his eyes in the rearview mirror haunts me every time I step into a taxi. And every time I wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, I can still hear his voice in my head, telling me to get out. I checked into the hotel late last night after a long day of meetings. My head was buzzing from all the numbers and business talk, so when I finally got to my room, I felt nothing but relief. The front desk guy had been polite but distant, and the room itself was just like any other, neither too fancy nor too cheap. I tossed my bag on the chair and fell into bed, too tired to notice anything strange. The morning after, I woke up feeling uneasy, though I couldn't quite place why. I shook off the feeling and headed to the door, ready to get breakfast and start another day of meetings. But the door didn't open. The handle turned, but nothing happened. Maybe it was stuck. I pulled harder, then tried pushing. Nothing. Annoyed, I grabbed the phone by the bed to call the front desk. Instead of a dial tone, all I got was static. I hung up and tried again, but still nothing. A cold chill crept up my spine, but I tried to stay calm. I banged on the door, hoping someone might hear me, but the thick wood just absorbed the sound. I wasn't going to panic, not yet. There had to be a logical explanation. I went to the bathroom, washed my face, and stared at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked tired, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Maybe the door was just jammed. I tried to force it open again, but the effort only made my hands sore. I decided to try the windows next. They were small and sealed shut, like in most hotel rooms. I tried to slide one open, but it wouldn't budge either. When I peered outside, all I could see was the dark alley below, empty and still. The uneasiness grew. Returning to the door, I gave it another go, this time slamming my shoulder into it. But the door didn't move, and the room remained stubbornly silent. My stomach knotted as I realized the seriousness of the situation. Was I really trapped here? I tried the phone again, and this time I heard something. It wasn't static anymore. It was my own voice on the other end. At first I thought it was some kind of sick joke, but the voice, my voice, wasn't making sense. It was calm, but the words were wrong. "You don't belong here," it said softly. "It's time to leave." I dropped the phone like it was burning hot. My thoughts started racing. Who could be doing this? How could they record my voice without me knowing? My mind was spinning, trying to find an explanation, but nothing made sense. Was I losing it? Panic started to creep in. I had to get out. I had to find a way. I tore through the room looking for something, anything that could help. That's when I found the first note. It was in my handwriting, hidden under the lamp on the bedside table. It simply said, "Try the closet." My heart pounded as I moved to the closet, unsure of what I'd find. The door creaked as I opened it, revealing only my clothes hanging neatly inside. But something felt off. I reached in and pushed aside the hangers, finding another note taped to the back wall. This one read, "You're getting closer." By this point, I was sweating, my hands shaking as I held the note. How could I have written these? I didn't remember doing it. But there was no one else here. My thoughts were tangled, fear rising with each passing minute. I spent the next hour searching the room. I found more notes, each leading me to another, all in my handwriting. Some were hidden in obvious places, under the pillow, in the drawer, while others were harder to find. The messages were all cryptic. "Time is running out. You're not alone. Look again." The last note was taped to the inside of the window I'd tried to open earlier. It said, "Check the door." My pulse quickened as I walked back to the door. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew I had to try. I gripped the handle and turned it, expecting resistance, but the door opened easily this time. For a moment, I just stood there, not sure if I was dreaming. When I stepped into the hallway, everything looked normal. People were walking by, a cleaning cart sat parked near another door, and the sounds of the hotel buzzed around me. But something wasn't right. The air felt heavy, like a weight pressing down on me. I walked to the elevator, hoping to leave this nightmare behind, but when the doors opened, I found myself staring at my hotel room again. My bag on the chair, the bed still unmade, the same clock on the wall ticking away. I backed away in horror, but when I turned around, I was standing at the room's entrance again. No matter what door I chose, they all led back to this room. My head started to pound, and the walls seemed to close in. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. My voice echoed in my ears, those strange whispers from the phone repeating over and over. I don't know how much time passed. I could have been there for hours, days, or even weeks. My sense of time was lost. My stomach growled, and I realized I hadn't eaten. Desperation clawed at me as I paced the room, looking for anything I hadn't already tried. I don't know when it happened, but at some point, I just gave up. I sat down on the bed and stared at the door, no longer caring if it opened or stayed shut. My mind was tired, and my body felt weak. If this was my fate, then so be it. And then, as if on cue, the door creaked open. Light from the hallway spilled into the room, and I could see people walking by, laughing and chatting like nothing was wrong. My legs shook as I stood up, part of me afraid to step out, part of me desperate to escape. I took a deep breath and walked through the door, feeling the warmth of the hallway. Relief washed over me until I looked back and saw the room. The bed was made, the bag was gone, and the notes had disappeared. It was like nothing had ever happened. But as I stood there, frozen in place, I felt a pull, like the room was calling me back. I turned to run, but the hallway blurred, and suddenly I was back in bed, staring at the ceiling as if I had never left. And that's when I realized I might never leave. I woke up to a sharp pain in my hand. My head felt heavy, like I'd been up drinking all night, but I hadn't touched a drop. My eyes were sticky, and everything around me was blurry at first. As I started to get my bearings, I noticed my hands. They were covered in blood. My heart jumped into my throat. It wasn't just my hands. My shirt was soaked, and there was a smear of it on the pillow next to me. I shot up from the bed, the pain in my hand growing worse. I looked down and saw deep scratches on my arm, as if I had been clawing at something in my sleep, but I didn't remember anything. The last thing I recalled was getting into bed, exhausted after a long day. Then, nothing. Just darkness until the moment I woke up, covered in blood. I rushed to the bathroom, hoping it was some kind of nightmare, but the reflection in the mirror showed the same horrifying sight. Blood everywhere. My mind raced. What had I done? Whose blood was this? I couldn't have hurt anyone, right? But the blood was there, undeniable. I ran to the kitchen, my hands shaking. There was a knife in the sink, covered in more blood. Panic started to take over. I couldn't think straight. My dog, Max, was nowhere to be seen. My heart pounded in my chest as I called out his name, but there was only silence. No barking, no familiar sound of his paws on the floor, just silence. What if I did something to Max? The thought made me feel sick. I rushed out into the backyard, calling his name over and over, but there was no sign of him. I tried to remember anything from last night, but my mind was completely blank. It was as if someone had erased that part of my memory. I decided to go back inside and clean myself up. Maybe it wasn't as bad as it seemed. Maybe there was some explanation I hadn't thought of yet. But as I scrubbed the blood off my hands and arms, I couldn't stop thinking about the knife, the scratches, and the missing dog. It didn't add up. I needed to figure out what happened. I grabbed my phone and checked the call log. Nothing. I hadn't called or messaged anyone. I decided to go to my neighbor's house. Maybe they had seen something, heard something. But when I knocked on their door, they just gave me strange looks. Mrs. Harris, the old lady next door, mentioned hearing some noises in the middle of the night. Sounded like someone was moving around outside, but I didn't think much of it, she said, squinting at me with suspicion. That didn't help. It only made things worse. I thanked her and hurried back to my house, trying not to look like the wreck I felt inside. As soon as I walked in, the phone rang. My stomach dropped when I saw it was an unknown number. I answered, and a cold voice on the other end told me that a body had been found near my house. They wanted to ask me some questions. Panic set in. I was sure I didn't hurt anyone, but the blood, the knife, the missing dog, they all pointed to something horrible. I hung up the phone and stared at the mess around me. I couldn't let the police find this. I started cleaning everything in a rush, scrubbing the floors, washing the knife, trying to get rid of any sign that something bad had happened. But no matter how much I cleaned, I couldn't erase the fear that was growing inside me. What if I was guilty? What if I did something terrible in my sleep and didn't remember? I've sleepwalked before, but never like this. Never with blood on my hands. I started to feel like a stranger in my own body, like there was a part of me I didn't know, a part that could be dangerous. I didn't know what to do. I considered turning myself in, telling the police everything. But what would I tell them? That I woke up covered in blood and had no idea what happened? It sounded crazy. They would think I was making it up, or worse, that I was trying to cover up a crime. Days went by, and I became more and more paranoid. I avoided everyone, barely leaving the house. I couldn't sleep, terrified that I might wake up to another nightmare. I started checking the locks on my doors and windows every hour, but it didn't make me feel any safer. Then I remembered something. A few months ago, I had installed a small security camera in the living room just to keep an eye on things when I wasn't home. I never really used it, but now it felt like my last hope to find out what happened that night. I dug out the old laptop and connected it to the camera, my hands trembling. I clicked through the footage until I found the night in question. My heart pounded as I watched myself on the screen, tossing and turning in bed before finally getting up. My breath caught in my throat as I watched myself walk into the kitchen, grab the knife, and leave the house. I was sleepwalking. I was actually out there, in the middle of the night, with a knife in my hand. The camera cut out after that. There was no footage of what happened next, no answers, just more questions. I sat there, staring at the blank screen, feeling like my whole world had just collapsed. I couldn't trust myself anymore. I couldn't trust my own mind. And the worst part? I still don't know where Max is. I always take the last train home. It's part of my routine after long, tiring days at work. My office keeps me late, and by the time I'm done, the city has fallen into a quiet slumber. The subway is usually half empty, just a few people scattered across the cars. The flickering lights outside the windows and the soft hum of the train always lull me into a sort of daze. It's peaceful, in a way, despite the exhaustion that weighs heavy on my eyelids. Tonight was no different, or so I thought. I was so tired that I couldn't keep my eyes open. The rhythmic swaying of the train, the repetitive clanking of the tracks, it all blurred together, pulling me under like a warm blanket. I drifted off without even realizing it, my head resting against the cool glass of the window. When I woke up, I immediately knew something was wrong. The train was still moving, but it wasn't the gentle ride I remembered. It felt more like a jolt, the kind that shakes you awake from a nightmare. I blinked, trying to clear the fog from my mind, and looked around. The first thing I noticed was the clock on the wall. It was much later than I expected, almost an hour past the time I should have reached my stop. Panic began to rise in my chest as I looked outside and realized that the station wasn't familiar. It was dimly lit, the kind of lighting that made everything look off, like a scene from an old movie. I stood up quickly, my heart pounding in my ears, and moved toward the doors, but they wouldn't open. I pressed the button, tried to pry them apart, but they didn't budge. The station outside looked empty, completely deserted. There was no one around, no sign of life anywhere. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong. I started walking through the train, hoping to find someone, anyone, who could explain what was happening. I called out, my voice shaky and uncertain, but it echoed back at me, the sound swallowed by the emptiness. The train cars were completely empty, just rows of cold, lifeless seats staring back at me. The silence was so thick, it felt like it was pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. That's when I heard the footsteps. They were faint at first, almost like an echo in the distance. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. The footsteps were coming from the far end of the train, growing louder with each passing second. I couldn't see anyone, but I could hear them, slow and deliberate, like someone was taking their time, enjoying the suspense. Fear gripped me, and I started moving again, faster this time. I tried the emergency buttons, pounded on the windows, but nothing worked. The train kept moving, the lights flickering on and off as the footsteps grew closer. My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Who was out there? What did they want? Why wouldn't the train stop? I hid behind one of the seats, crouching low, trying to make myself as small as possible. My heart was hammering in my chest, the sound so loud I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. The footsteps stopped for a moment and I held my breath, praying that they wouldn't find me. Then they started again, but this time they were much closer. I could hear the soft, heavy breathing of someone just a few feet away. I peeked out from my hiding spot and saw a shadowy figure at the end of the car, slowly making their way towards me. The dim light made it hard to see any details, but I could make out the outline of a tall, hunched figure, moving with an unsettling calmness. They didn't seem to be in a hurry, almost like they knew I was trapped, with nowhere to go. Panic surged through me, and I clutched my phone, my fingers trembling as I tried to dial for help. But there was no signal, just the mocking display of no service on the screen. The figure kept coming closer, their breathing louder now, more deliberate. I pressed myself against the seat, trying to melt into it, to disappear, but it was useless. I could see them now, just a few feet away. They stopped, as if sensing my presence, and for a moment, everything went silent. The train, the footsteps, even the flickering lights. It all stopped. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for whatever was going to happen next, my mind racing with fear and confusion. And then, without warning, the train jolted violently, throwing me against the seat. The lights flickered back on, brighter than before, and the door slid open with a loud hiss. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline fueling my every move, and ran out of the train without looking back. As I stumbled onto the platform, gasping for breath, I realized that I was at my usual station. The familiar signs, the brightly lit corridors. It was all exactly where it should be. But something was off. The station was empty, eerily quiet, with no one in sight. I looked back at the train, expecting to see the figure standing there, watching me, but the car was empty, completely empty, as if no one had been there at all. My heart was still racing, my mind struggling to make sense of what had just happened. As I made my way toward the exit, my eyes fell on a poster on the wall. It was a missing person poster, old and faded, but the face on it made my blood run cold. It looked exactly like me, the same eyes, the same hair, everything. My legs felt weak, and I had to grab onto the railing to keep from collapsing. I stumbled out of the station, the cold night air hitting me like a slap in the face. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. All I could do was keep moving, away from the station, away from the train, away from the nightmare that I had just lived through. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. I've never been the kind of person who scares easily, but that night still keeps me awake sometimes. I was just doing my job, a regular babysitting gig in a quiet neighborhood. The family wasn't new to me. I'd watched their daughter, Emily, a few times before. They were nice people, always in a rush but polite. Emily was a sweet girl, only 6 years old, and pretty quiet. She'd usually be asleep when I got there, so all I had to do was watch TV until the parents came back. Easy money. That night was no different at first. The parents seemed a bit more hurried than usual, though. The mom barely looked at me as she gave instructions. She's already asleep upstairs. "You know where everything is," she said, before they rushed out the door. I didn't think much of it. I settled on the couch with my phone, flipping through social media, waiting for time to pass. Not long after, I started to feel tired. Really tired. It wasn't normal. I remember thinking I shouldn't be this sleepy, not so soon. But the warmth of the house, the quiet, it just made me want to close my eyes for a second. Just a second, I told myself. I don't know how long I was out, but when I opened my eyes, it was dark. The only light came from the TV screen, flickering in the dim room. My first thought was, what time is it? The digital clock on the wall said it was past midnight, but I couldn't remember what time it had been when I arrived. Something felt off. The silence wasn't just quiet. It was heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. I shook off the unease and decided to check on Emily. I headed upstairs, my footsteps sounding too loud on the wooden stairs. When I pushed open her bedroom door, my heart stopped. The bed was empty. The sheets were rumpled, and the blanket was on the floor. Panic surged through me. Where could she have gone? I quickly searched the room, hoping maybe she was hiding, but there was nothing. Then my phone rang. The sound was so sudden it made me jump. I looked at the screen. No caller ID. My hands were shaking as I answered. I didn't even say hello, just waited. But there was only silence on the other end. I said, "Hello?" Again, my voice trembling, but no one replied. Then the call ended. I was frozen for a moment, staring at the screen. I tried to convince myself it was just a prank call, but deep down I knew it wasn't. Something was seriously wrong. I needed to find Emily, fast. I ran back downstairs, checking every room, but she wasn't anywhere. As I moved through the house, I started noticing strange things. The photos on the wall, were they the same as before? I couldn't remember, but something about them felt different. The furniture, too. Had that chair always been in the corner? And the front door. I was sure I'd locked it when I came in, but now it was slightly open. The fear in my chest grew. This wasn't right. This wasn't how the house was supposed to look. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but then I hesitated. What if they thought I was crazy? What if I had just lost track of time, and Emily was somewhere I hadn't checked yet? But then the phone rang again. I answered without thinking. This time, there was a voice. It was cold, almost robotic, and it asked, "Have you found the child yet?" My blood ran cold. "Who is this?" I demanded, but the line went dead again. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding in my ears. I couldn't think straight. I needed to do something. But what? Call the police? Run outside? I decided to check the backyard, thinking maybe Emily had wandered out there. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen and went to the back door. It was unlocked, even though I was sure I hadn't touched it. Stepping outside, the night air was thick, almost suffocating. The flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, but I couldn't see much. Then, in the far corner of the yard, I saw a figure. My heart jumped into my throat. It was small, child-sized, and holding something in its hands. I walked slowly towards it, every step heavy with dread. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't Emily. It was a doll, an old, dirty thing that looked like it had been left out in the weather for years. And the figure, it wasn't moving, just standing there, holding the doll like it was something precious. My breath caught in my throat as I got close enough to see clearly. The figure was just a shadow, something that wasn't really there. And then, just as suddenly as I'd seen it, it was gone. I was alone in the yard, holding a doll that wasn't there before. I stumbled back inside, locking the door behind me. The house felt different again. Everything was wrong. Wrong pictures, wrong furniture, wrong everything. It was like I had stepped into another version of the house, one where I didn't belong. I sat on the couch clutching the doll, my mind racing. When the parents came home, last night was just like any other night. My wife Lisa and I were getting ready for bed. Our house was quiet, almost too quiet, but I didn't think much of it. We've lived here for years, and nothing strange has ever happened. It's the kind of place where you feel safe. I guess that's why what happened next felt so wrong. We were both tired. I was already half asleep when I heard it. The sound of our bedroom door creaking open. It was slow, like someone was carefully pushing it. I opened my eyes and saw that Lisa had heard it too. She turned to me, her eyes wide, but neither of us said anything. We were both too sleepy to care much. I figured it was the wind or maybe something wrong with the door hinges. It's an old house after all. I rolled over, telling myself to ignore it, and tried to fall back asleep. But just as I was drifting off, I heard something else. At first, I wasn't sure if I was dreaming, but then it came again. Soft, barely there, but definitely real. It was a whisper. Someone was whispering my name from the hallway. My heart started to pound and I glanced at Lisa. She was sitting up now, her face pale. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, trying to stay calm. Maybe it was the wind again, or some trick of the house. I told her not to worry, that it was probably nothing. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. I listened carefully, hoping it was just my imagination, but the whisper came again. This time, it was louder, clearer, and there was no mistaking it. Someone, or something, was calling our names. I sat up and rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the drowsiness. "It's probably just the house settling," I said, trying to convince myself as much as her. But Lisa wasn't buying it, and neither was I. The whispers kept coming, and they were getting closer. I knew I had to check it out. I couldn't just lie there and do nothing. So I got up, grabbed the flashlight from my bedside table, and headed towards the hallway. My hands were shaking as I turned on the light. The beam cut through the darkness, casting long shadows on the walls. I stepped into the hallway, expecting to see something, anything, but it was empty. The air was still, and the only sound was the thumping of my heart. The whispers stopped as soon as I entered the hallway. It was like they knew I was there. I walked up and down the hallway, shining the light into every corner, but there was nothing. No sign of an intruder, no open windows, nothing that could explain the whispers. The house was completely still, like it always was. I went back to the bedroom, feeling more confused than ever. Lisa was sitting on the edge of the bed, her eyes fixed on the door. "Did you see anything?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head. "Nothing. The house is empty." She didn't look convinced, and honestly, I wasn't either. But what could I do? There was nothing there, and I couldn't explain the whispers. Maybe we were both just tired, hearing things that weren't really there. I tried to reassure her, and myself, that it was all in our heads, and we should just go back to bed. But as I lay there in the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. We stayed silent for a while, trying to calm down, but sleep wouldn't come. Every little noise seemed magnified, every creak of the house setting my nerves on edge. Then, just as I was starting to relax, it happened again. The whispers returned, louder and clearer than before. They were coming from the hallway, and this time there was no mistaking it. They were calling both our names. The door creaked open once more, even though I had closed it earlier. My heart raced, and I could feel Lisa gripping my arm tightly. This wasn't normal. This wasn't the wind or the house settling. Something was in our home, and it knew our names. I wanted to believe it was a prank, or maybe some strange echo from the street outside. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. This was real, and it was happening right now. I could feel the cold sweat forming on my back as I sat up, unsure of what to do next. Then, out of nowhere, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. It was icy and firm, gripping me tightly. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Lisa gasped, and when I turned to look, there was nothing there. The hand was gone, but the feeling of its touch lingered, like a ghostly imprint. "We need to leave," I whispered, barely able to keep my voice steady. Lisa nodded, tears in her eyes, and we both scrambled out of bed. We didn't bother packing anything. We just wanted to get out. But as we reached the front door, our escape plan crumbled. The door wouldn't budge. It was locked, and no matter how hard I tried, it wouldn't open. I fumbled with the lock, checked the deadbolt, but everything seemed fine. It was like the door was sealed shut, trapping us inside. Panic set in as I realized we couldn't get out. The whispers grew louder, echoing through the house, surrounding us. They weren't just calling our names anymore. They were laughing, mocking us. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt like I was going to be sick. We were trapped, and there was nothing we could do. I turned to Lisa, but she was staring at something behind me, her face drained of all color. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help it. Slowly, I turned around. There was nothing there. The hallway was empty, just like before, but I could still feel the cold presence, watching us, waiting. The whispers continued, growing louder and more insistent, filling my head with their terrible sound. We never made it out that night. The door stayed locked, the whispers stayed with us, and the house was no longer our home. It had become something else, something dark and full of malice. And as the whispers finally faded, I realized that we were never going to leave. We were part of the house now, just like the whispers, forever trapped in the place we once called home. I had been visiting an old friend in a town a couple of hours away. We hadn't seen each other in years, so we spent the whole night talking and catching up. Before I knew it, it was past midnight. I didn't like driving that late, but I was too tired to stay over, so I decided to head home. The roads were mostly empty, which should have been a relief, but instead, it made everything feel strange. The darkness felt heavier than usual, and I noticed that the streetlights seemed dim, almost as if they were struggling to stay on. The silence inside the car was loud, if that makes any sense. I wasn't familiar with this area, so I kept the GPS on, just in case. Then, I made a mistake. I wasn't paying close attention and took a wrong turn. I immediately realized it when I saw that the road was much narrower, with no signs or lights. I tried to turn back, but the road seemed to twist and turn in ways that made no sense. It was like the street was deliberately trying to confuse me. The houses were getting worse the further I went. Most of them were old, with peeling paint and broken windows. Some looked abandoned, with tall grass growing wildly in the front yards. The weird thing was, there were no cars parked anywhere, no lights in the windows, nothing to suggest that anyone actually lived there. The more I tried to find my way back, the deeper I seemed to go into this strange, lifeless neighborhood. That's when I noticed my phone had no signal. I held it up, moving it around to catch even the weakest bar, but nothing worked. It was like this place was cut off from the rest of the world. Panic started to creep in, but I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe I could find someone to ask for directions. But as I drove, I realized there was no one around, or at least that's what I thought at first. Then I saw them, shadowy figures standing on the corners of the streets, just barely visible in the darkness. They weren't moving, just standing there, watching. I couldn't make out their faces, but I could feel their eyes on me. I slowed down a little, thinking about asking them for help, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way they just stood there, not moving, or the way the darkness seemed to cling to them like a second skin. I don't know, but I didn't stop. I kept driving. But the figures didn't go away. They were on every corner, always watching. I tried to ignore them, but it was impossible. I took another turn, hoping to find a way out, but the road suddenly ended in a dead end. I swear, that road wasn't a dead end before. I was sure I could have gone straight just a moment ago, but now there was a brick wall in front of me. My heart was pounding in my chest. I threw the car into reverse and sped back down the street. The figures were gone now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still watching, waiting. That's when I saw the convenience store. It was small and barely lit, the kind of place you only see in old horror movies. But it was the first sign of life I'd seen since I got lost. So I pulled over and went inside. The man behind the counter looked up at me when I entered, but there was something off about him. His eyes were strange, almost empty, and his smile didn't reach them. I told him I was lost and asked how I could get back to the main road. He paused for a long time, like he was thinking about what to say, then gave me directions that didn't make much sense. He said I had to turn left, then right, then left again, and I'd be back on track. But the whole time, he kept smiling that strange smile. Something inside me screamed not to trust him, but I was desperate. So I thanked him and left, following his directions. It wasn't long before I realized they led me even deeper into the neighborhood. I was now on a street that had no exit, another dead end. That's when the figures came back. They stepped out of the shadows, slowly approaching the car. There were more of them this time, and they were closer. I couldn't see their faces, but I didn't need to. I could feel their intentions. I tried to start the car, but it wouldn't turn over. I turned the key again and again, but nothing happened. The figures were almost at the car now, their hands reaching out, tapping on the windows. The sound was light, almost polite, but it filled me with a terror I can't describe. I was trapped, and there was nothing I could do. I closed my eyes, bracing for whatever was going to happen next. But then, just as suddenly as it started, it all stopped. The figures were gone, the car started, and the road ahead was clear again. I didn't waste a second. I floored it, speeding down the street until I was back on a road I recognized. I didn't look back, not even once. When I finally got home, I felt like I had escaped something terrible, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. The next morning, I went out to check the car. I needed to convince myself it was just a nightmare, that I hadn't really seen what I thought I saw. But when I looked at the side of the car, I found deep scratches, long and jagged, as if something had tried to tear its way in. When I first moved into the apartment, everything seemed perfect. It was small but cozy, and it was mine. I liked the quiet, the sense of privacy, especially in my bedroom. It was my safe place where I could relax after long days at work. I was so sure that nothing could go wrong in this little corner of the world. But soon, I started noticing small things that didn't seem right. A book moved from its spot on the shelf. My phone, which I was certain I had left on the nightstand, was on the floor. The window that I always kept shut was open just a crack. I laughed it off at first, thinking I was just being forgetful. I had been under a lot of stress, so I didn't think much of it. I blamed my scattered mind and went on with my life. One day, while I was cleaning the bedroom, I found something that made my blood run cold. Hidden in the corner of the room, tucked away near the ceiling, was a tiny camera. It was almost invisible, but I found it. I stared at it for what felt like hours, trying to convince myself that it was some sort of mistake. Maybe it was left there by the previous tenant, or even the maintenance crew. But the idea that someone had been watching me in my most private moments, was terrifying. I felt sick to my stomach. I went straight to my landlord. I tried to stay calm, but my voice was shaking as I told him what I had found. I expected him to admit it, to say it was some kind of security measure, even though that would still be creepy. But instead, he looked as surprised as I felt. He swore up and down that he had no idea about any camera and said he would change the locks immediately and inspect the apartment himself. He seemed so genuine, but something didn't feel right. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. Back in my apartment, I sat on the edge of my bed, holding the camera in my hands. My mind was racing with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Who put this here? Why? My hands were trembling as I connected the camera to my computer. I didn't want to see what was on it, but I had to know. The footage made me wish I had never looked. Every night while I slept, someone was in my room. The figure was careful, moving slowly, avoiding making any noise that could wake me. They knew exactly where the camera was. They never looked directly at it, but their movements were precise, as if they were fully aware they were being recorded. My breath caught in my throat as I watched the person stand by my bed, just watching me sleep for minutes that felt like hours. How had I never woken up? How had I never felt them there? I started to panic. I couldn't stay there, but I had nowhere else to go. The landlord had changed the locks, but that didn't help. Somehow this person was still getting in. I installed more cameras, hidden even better than the first one, but it didn't stop them. Every morning, I would find things moved, signs that someone had been there, but never a clue as to how they were getting in or who it was. I started sleeping with the lights on, but it didn't make me feel safer. I was jumpy, scared of every little noise, every shadow. I couldn't trust anyone, not even the police. They didn't take me seriously. They said it was probably nothing, maybe just a prank. The worst part was not knowing who it was. My mind started playing tricks on me. I became suspicious of everyone, my coworkers, the neighbors, even the landlord. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I couldn't concentrate at work. I didn't want to go home, but I had nowhere else to go. I stopped talking to people. They wouldn't believe me anyway, and I didn't know who I could trust. Finally, one night, I watched the footage again, hoping to catch some detail I had missed. My heart stopped when I realized something new. The person in the footage, they weren't just anyone. They were someone I knew, someone I trusted, someone who had been in my apartment before. I couldn't believe it at first. It felt like my world was collapsing around me. But there was no denying it. The way they moved, the little habits, the clothes, they matched perfectly. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let this person into my life? I felt a mix of terror and betrayal that I can't even begin to describe. The last video I watched ended with them standing over me, staring at the camera, as if they knew I would eventually find out. And then the screen went black. The camera had been turned off, but I didn't know by who. I packed a bag and left that night, without telling anyone where I was going. I haven't looked back. But even now, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Every time I close my eyes, I see that figure standing over me, and I wonder, did I really get away? Or are they still out there, watching, waiting? I want to share something strange that happened to me. I don't know how to explain it, and I'm not sure what to do next. Maybe writing it down will help, or maybe it will just make me look crazy. Either way, here's what happened. It started one morning when I woke up and found muddy footprints leading from my front door to my bedroom. The footprints stopped right at the foot of my bed, where I was still lying. My first thought was that someone had broken into my house during the night, but there were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no damaged locks. Everything was exactly how I left it before going to bed. I even checked if maybe I had tracked in the mud myself, but I couldn't see how that was possible. The floors were clean the night before, and I always locked the doors before going to sleep. I told myself it was nothing, probably just my imagination playing tricks on me. I cleaned up the footprints and went on with my day, trying to forget about it. But the next night, the footprints came back. I woke up in the middle of the night, feeling uneasy. I didn't know why, but something felt off. When I turned on the light, I saw the same muddy footprints again. Only this time, they were closer to my bed. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't normal. Someone was in my house while I slept, getting closer to me each night. But how? The doors were locked. The windows were shut tight. There was no way anyone could have come in without me hearing it. I double-checked everything, every lock, every window. I even considered calling the police, but what would I tell them? That someone was leaving muddy footprints in my house without any sign of breaking in. I didn't want to sound crazy, so I decided to wait. Maybe it was all just a strange coincidence. Maybe I was overthinking things. But as the nights passed, the footprints kept appearing. Every time they were closer, almost reaching the side of my bed. I stopped sleeping properly, staying awake for hours, listening for any sound that might explain what was happening. But there was nothing, just silence, and those footprints appearing out of nowhere. I was scared, really scared. My own home, the place where I was supposed to feel safe, had become a place of fear. I felt like I was being watched, hunted even. But by who? Or by what? The fear of not knowing was eating me alive. I knew I had to do something, so I set up a camera in my room. If someone was coming in, I was going to catch them on video. That night, I could barely sleep. My mind was racing, thinking about what I might see in the morning. I forced myself to close my eyes, but even then, my dreams were filled with those muddy footprints, getting closer and closer. When I woke up, I didn't even want to look at the camera, but I had to know. What I saw on the footage made my blood run cold. It wasn't someone else walking around in my house. It was me. I was the one making the footprints. In the middle of the night, I got up from my bed, walked to the front door, stepped outside, and then came back in, leaving the muddy tracks behind me. But I had no memory of doing any of this. I didn't even know I was sleepwalking. The realization hit me hard. It was me all along. But why? Why would I start sleepwalking now, and why like this? It didn't make any sense. I started to wonder what else I might be doing while I was asleep. What if I hurt myself? What if I hurt someone else? The fear of losing control, of not knowing what I was capable of, was overwhelming. I did everything I could think of to stop myself from sleepwalking. I tied myself to the bed. I set alarms to wake me up every hour. I even tried sleeping in a different room. But none of it worked. The muddy footprints kept coming back, each time more terrifying than the last. Then, one night, the footprints led outside again. But this time, they didn't stop at the front door. They continued out into the yard, disappearing into the darkness. I woke up that morning with mud all over my hands, and I had no memory of what I had done or where I had gone. Now I'm scared to sleep. I'm scared of what I might do next, or where I might end up. The footprints haven't appeared since that night, but the fear hasn't gone away. I keep wondering if it's really over, or if it's just the beginning of something worse. And the worst part? I don't know if I can trust myself anymore. I don't know how I ended up on that road, but I remember how tired I was. It was a long day at work, and I was barely keeping my eyes open. The dark highway stretched out in front of me, empty and lonely. I kept telling myself that I could make it home if I just stayed focused. But my eyelids felt heavy, and I could feel my head nodding. I should have pulled over, but I didn't. The last thing I remember was the blur of the trees on the side of the road. Then, suddenly, everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was in pain. My head was throbbing, and I tasted blood in my mouth. My car was off the road, buried in a ditch. The front was smashed against something solid, and I could feel the pressure on my leg. I tried to move, but my leg was stuck, pinned under the crumpled dashboard. Panic hit me like a wave. I fumbled around for my phone, but it was nowhere to be found. The car was wrecked, and I was alone. My chest tightened as I realized how deep in trouble I was. I yelled for help, my voice cracking in the silence. But no one answered. The night swallowed my cries, leaving me in the dark, broken and scared. Hours passed, though it felt like days. My leg throbbed, and the cold started to creep in. I kept trying to free myself, pushing against the dashboard, but the pain was unbearable. I screamed again, but my voice was weak, fading into the stillness of the night. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. And then I heard it. A soft crunching sound, like footsteps on gravel. I froze, my heart pounding. Relief flooded through me. Someone was out there. Maybe they heard me. I tried to shout again, but my voice was hoarse. Still, I managed to call out, my words shaky. "Hello? Please, help me." But there was no answer. Just the sound of those slow, deliberate footsteps. They seemed to circle the car, moving closer and then stopping. My mind raced with questions. Why weren't they answering? Were they trying to help, or were they just watching? My relief started to turn into something else, something darker. Fear. The footsteps didn't make sense. They weren't coming straight to me. Instead, they moved around the car, stopping and starting again. I couldn't see anything outside. It was too dark, but I could feel the presence of someone or something just beyond my reach. I was trapped, and I didn't know who was out there with me. I kept calling out, hoping for some kind of response, but there was only silence. Every time the footsteps stopped, I held my breath, waiting for them to start again. My mind began to play tricks on me. I imagined a person out there watching me, maybe even enjoying my fear. But I couldn't be sure if it was real or if my mind was just going crazy from the pain and isolation. As the night dragged on, the footsteps grew closer. I couldn't see anyone, but I could hear the breathing. Slow, deep breaths that sent chills down my spine. It felt like they were right next to the car, just out of sight. My heart raced, and I started to panic. Was someone really out there? Or was I just imagining it? I wanted to see who or what was out there, but every time I tried to move, the pain in my leg stopped me. I was helpless, stuck in the car with no way to defend myself. All I could do was listen as the footsteps and breathing surrounded me. The fear was overwhelming, and I started to wonder if I'd ever make it out of there. As the first light of dawn started to break, I finally saw something. A shadow, just outside the car, barely visible in the morning light. My heart skipped a beat. There was someone there. But instead of feeling relieved, I was terrified. The figure wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at me through the broken window. I couldn't make out their face, but I could feel their eyes on me. My mind was racing. Who were they? Why were they just standing there? I wanted to scream, to tell them to help me, but the words stuck in my throat. The fear was too much. I was shaking, and the pain was unbearable. I felt like I was slipping away, my consciousness fading as the terror took over. In those last moments, as everything went blurry, I realized something. I might never know who or what had been outside my car that night. I might never know if they were there to help or to hurt, and I might never get out of that car alive. The last thing I saw was that shadowy figure, still watching, still waiting, as everything went dark again. I don't know what happened after that. Maybe I passed out, maybe I died. But all I can remember is the fear, the cold, and those footsteps in the dark. I'm not sure if I'll ever be found, or if anyone will ever know what happened to me. But if you're reading this, please be careful on those lonely roads at night. You never know what or who might be out there, waiting. I've always thought of myself as someone who doesn't scare easily. I mean, living alone has its challenges, but I've managed just fine for years. At least, that's what I used to think before last night. Now I'm not sure of anything anymore. It was around 2 a.m. when the phone rang. The sharp sound cut through the silence of the night, jolting me awake. My heart was pounding, partly from the shock of being woken up so suddenly, and partly from the unease that always comes with an unknown number flashing on your screen at that hour. I stared at the phone, debating whether to answer. What if it was an emergency? I finally picked up, hoping it was a wrong number. A voice I didn't recognize greeted me. "I'm watching you," it said, low and cold. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "Who is this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. But instead of an answer, the voice described how I was lying in bed, my hand resting on the pillow, the way I had just reached to grab my phone. Every detail was exact, like the person on the other end could see me right then. My heart started beating faster. I was sure now this was some sort of sick prank, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just someone with too much time on their hands. Maybe they had somehow hacked into my camera. But when I checked, the camera was off. I decided to move around to see if the caller would keep up. As I got out of bed and walked towards the living room, the voice on the phone described every step I took. It wasn't just a prank. Whoever it was, they were here, in my house, watching me. I could feel the fear spreading through me like ice, freezing me in place for a moment. I needed to get help, but when I tried to call the police, the line was dead. My cell phone was in my hand, but every time I tried to dial 911, the call wouldn't go through. I was trapped. I thought about running out of the house, but where would I go? What if someone was waiting for me outside? I decided to grab a knife from the kitchen. I felt a bit safer with it in my hand, though I could barely keep my grip from trembling. The voice kept talking, growing more menacing with every word. They seemed to enjoy the fear they were causing, and it made me feel sick. I couldn't stay here any longer. I had to find help. I suddenly remembered my neighbor, Sarah. Her house was close, just across the yard. We weren't best friends or anything, but she was always nice to me, and I knew she would help. Taking a deep breath, I bolted out of the house, not even bothering to lock the door behind me. My feet pounded against the ground as I ran, praying that I wouldn't hear footsteps behind me. When I reached her door, I banged on it desperately. Sarah opened the door, looking confused and half asleep. I was shaking so badly I could barely get the words out. I tried to explain what had happened, but it all came out in a rush. She put her hand on my shoulder, trying to calm me down, and told me I was safe now. She led me inside, locking the door behind us. We sat down in her living room. Sarah handed me a glass of water, and I tried to collect myself, to make sense of what had just happened. She was talking to me, trying to reassure me, but my mind was racing. I kept replaying the call in my head, the voice describing everything I did. How could they have known? And then, I saw it. Sarah's phone, sitting on the table next to her, lit up with a notification. My eyes locked onto it, and I felt my heart drop into my stomach. It was a call from the same unknown number that had called me. My blood turned cold as the realization hit me. I slowly looked up at Sarah, and our eyes met. She had this strange smile on her face, one that didn't reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile that made my skin crawl. My heart pounded in my chest as the pieces fell into place. Sarah was the one who had called me. She had been the voice on the phone. She had been watching me. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. I had left the knife back at my house. I had nothing to defend myself with. Sarah's smile grew wider as she picked up the phone, still ringing in her hand. "You really shouldn't have come here," she said softly, the menace in her voice unmistakable now. I backed away, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I was trapped, no way out. She took a step towards me, the phone still in her hand. I knew then that no one was coming to help me. The phone rang and rang, echoing in the small room as she closed in on me. The last thing I remember is the sound of the phone, that awful ringing, and the way her smile never faltered. Then, nothing but darkness. Last night, something happened to me that I can't fully explain. It's still hard to believe, but I need to share this story hoping that writing it down will make it feel less real. Maybe someone will understand what I went through. I had just finished a long day at work. My head was pounding and my eyes felt heavy as I drove back home. I don't remember much of the drive, just the usual route. Right turn, left turn, a few more blocks. My thoughts were more focused on getting to bed than on the road. When I finally parked, everything seemed like it always did. The house looked the same in the dim light, quiet and familiar. But when I walked up to the door, something didn't feel right. Maybe it was just the tiredness, I told myself. I fumbled with the keys, the metal slipping between my fingers as I unlocked the door. It clicked open with a creak, just like it always did. The living room was dark, and when I reached for the light switch, the bulb flickered before settling into a dim glow. I brushed it off. Lights flicker all the time, right? I took off my shoes and headed deeper into the house. But as I moved through the hallway, the feeling that something was off got stronger. The shadows seemed darker, the silence more intense. I thought I heard a distant thump, but I convinced myself it was just the house settling. When I tried to leave the living room, I reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. I twisted it harder, but it felt like it was stuck. I pulled again, using all my strength, but it didn't move an inch. Panic started to creep in. I checked the other doors, but they were all the same. Locked, stuck, or just wouldn't open. My heartbeat quickened, and I began to feel trapped. I needed to calm down, I told myself. Maybe I was just so tired that my mind was playing tricks on me. I decided to sit down, take a deep breath, and think. That's when I noticed the photos on the walls. They were family photos, just like the ones I had at home. At first, they looked perfectly normal. My parents, my siblings, the usual memories. But when I looked closer, I noticed small, unsettling details. The clothes they were wearing weren't quite right. The background in some of the photos was different from what I remembered. My brother's smile seemed off, too wide, too forced. My mother's eyes seemed to follow me, even when I moved across the room. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that these photos, though almost identical to mine, were not the same. As I stood there staring at them, I felt the walls closing in on me. This wasn't my home. But it looked so much like it. Every detail, every piece of furniture, even the scent in the air. It all screamed home, but it wasn't. I needed to get out. Now. I rushed through the house, looking for anything that would help me escape. That's when I found the bedroom. My bedroom. Everything was there, just like I left it. The bed, the closet, the nightstand with the lamp. But there was something on the bed that didn't belong. A photo album, one I had never seen before. I picked it up, my hands trembling. As I flipped through the pages, I saw more photos of my family, but something was wrong. In every picture, there was an extra person, a man. He looked just like me, but his face was slightly different. His smile was wrong, too wide, too knowing. And the last picture in the album? It was a close-up of his face, with a caption written underneath, "Welcome home." That's when I lost it. I threw the album across the room and ran to the window. I tried to break the glass, to smash my way out, but it was as if the windows were made of steel. Nothing worked. My breath was coming in short gasps, and I could feel the walls closing in again. That's when I heard it, the sound of footsteps. They were coming from upstairs. I froze, my mind racing. Someone else was in the house. I needed to hide, but where? Every room felt like a trap, every corner a dead end. The footsteps grew louder, coming closer. I didn't know where to go, what to do. I could feel my sanity slipping away, fear gripping every part of me. Finally, I crouched down in a corner of the living room, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. I heard the door creak open slowly, but I couldn't bring myself to turn around. I could feel someone standing behind me, breathing down my neck. A hand touched my shoulder, cold and firm. In that moment, I knew. This wasn't my house. It had never been my house. But I had walked in, and now there was no way out. I whispered to myself, "This isn't my house," as the darkness closed in around me. And then, everything went silent. I don't remember what happened next, or how I got out. All I know is that I'm back in my own home now, but I don't feel safe. I can't shake the feeling that something followed me, that whatever was in that house is still out there, waiting. Maybe it's still inside me, just waiting for the right moment to come out. I live alone, and I've always been okay with that. My small apartment isn't anything special, but it's mine. Lately, though, I've been feeling really tired. No matter how long I sleep, I wake up exhausted. A friend suggested I download a sleep tracking app, one of those that records noises and tracks your sleep patterns. I thought, why not? If it could help me figure out why I was always so tired, it was worth a shot. The first few nights, everything seemed normal. The app showed I wasn't sleeping as well as I thought, with lots of tossing and turning. It also recorded small noises, like the creaking of my bed or the hum of the refrigerator. Nothing unusual, just the normal sounds of a quiet apartment at night. But then, a few nights in, I noticed something weird. The app had recorded something strange, a faint voice. It was just a whisper, and at first, I thought it might be a mistake. Maybe it picked up a sound from outside, but I live on the top floor and the windows were shut. I replayed the recording over and over, trying to understand what it was. The voice was too soft to make out the words, but it was definitely there, and it was definitely inside my room. The next night, I went to bed feeling uneasy. I set the app again, hoping it wouldn't record anything strange this time. But in the morning, when I checked, there it was. The same faint voice, a little clearer now. It was still hard to tell what it was saying, but it was enough to make my skin crawl. Someone was speaking in my room while I was asleep, but I live alone. I started to get paranoid. I double-checked the locks on my doors and windows, making sure everything was secure before I went to bed. I even pushed a chair against the door, just in case. But each morning, when I checked the app, there was the voice again, and it was getting clearer each time. I began to dread going to sleep, but I needed to know what was happening. I started searching online for explanations. Maybe the app was malfunctioning, maybe it was picking up interference from somewhere. But nothing made sense. The voice was too clear, too close, like someone was standing right next to my bed. I decided to take things a step further. I changed all the locks, even though I knew it wouldn't really make a difference. I installed a security camera in my bedroom, hidden so well that even I had to double-check it was there. If someone was coming into my apartment, I would catch them. I was sure of it. That night, I lay in bed, heart pounding, waiting for something to happen. I left the app running, and the camera too. I don't know how long it took me to fall asleep, but I must have drifted off eventually. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of the voice louder than ever before. This time, it wasn't a recording. It was happening right then. I froze, too terrified to move. The voice was whispering, low and menacing, like it knew I was awake. It was saying things I couldn't understand, but the tone was unmistakably threatening. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would explode out of my chest. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. I just lay there, paralyzed by fear, listening to this voice that shouldn't have been there. After what felt like hours, the voice finally stopped. I stayed in bed until the sun came up, too scared to move. When I finally got the courage to get up, I checked the camera footage, dreading what I might find. The video showed me, lying in bed, just as I had been. But then, around the time I had woken up, the camera picked up something else. It was me, but not me. The camera showed me sitting up in bed, eyes closed, mouth moving. I was the one speaking, in a low, unfamiliar tone. The words were still unclear, but it was my voice. I was the one whispering those disturbing things, all while I was asleep. I didn't know what to think. Had I been sleep-talking all along? But why did it sound so different, so terrifying? I watched the footage again and again, hoping it was some kind of trick, but it wasn't. The voice was mine. I uninstalled the app that day, but I can't shake the feeling that something isn't right. I've tried to convince myself that it was just a weird phase, maybe stress or something like that. But every night, when I lie down to sleep, I can't help but wonder if I'll wake up to that voice again. And if I do, I'm not sure I'll be able to pretend it's just me. I've always been careful, maybe a bit too much. Living alone in a small apartment has made me cautious. Every night before I go to bed, I check all the doors and windows, making sure everything is locked. It's a routine that gives me a sense of safety, especially after hearing about a few break-ins in the neighborhood recently. Nothing major, but enough to make me more alert. I tell myself that as long as I lock everything, I'll be fine. The first time it happened, I thought it was my mistake. I woke up in the middle of the night, the kind of waking where you're not sure why you're awake, but you are. My heart was racing, and I couldn't figure out why until I noticed something. The window by my bed was wide open. I remember locking it before going to sleep, but now it was open, letting the cool night air fill the room. I got up, closed it, and locked it again. I didn't think much about it at the time. Maybe I had forgotten to lock it, or maybe it wasn't shut properly. It was easy to blame myself, so I went back to bed, convincing myself it was just a small mistake. The next night, the same thing happened. I woke up again, and the window was open. This time, I was sure I had locked it. I even remembered double-checking. A chill ran through me, not just from the cold air, but from the feeling that something wasn't right. I locked it again, but this time I couldn't fall back asleep. I lay there, staring at the window, feeling like someone was watching me. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But the feeling didn't go away. Over the next few days, I became more and more uneasy. Every noise, every creak of the floorboards made me jump. I started checking the locks multiple times before bed, making sure everything was secure. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. It was like a shadow that followed me everywhere, lurking just out of sight. I started to doubt myself. Was I imagining things? Was I losing my mind? I didn't want to tell anyone because I was afraid they'd think I was crazy. But every night the window was open, and every night I locked it again, feeling more and more like a prisoner in my own home. Then came the night when everything changed. I had enough of feeling scared and decided to stay awake, pretending to sleep, hoping to catch whatever was happening. I lay there for hours, my eyes barely open, staring at the window. Nothing happened for the longest time. I was starting to think maybe I was imagining it all when I heard it. The sound was faint at first, a soft scraping noise, like something brushing against the window. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to hear. The noise got louder, and then, to my horror, I saw the window begin to move. It was opening, slowly, as if Someone was pushing it from the outside. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just watched as the window slid open and a shadowy figure appeared. It was dark, too dark to make out any details, but I could see enough to know it was a person. They were trying to get inside. Panic surged through me. Should I scream? Should I run? I was frozen with fear, my mind racing but my body unable to respond. The figure moved slowly, almost deliberately, as if they knew I was watching but didn't care. They climbed halfway through the window and I finally snapped out of my paralysis. I gasped, my breath shaky and loud in the silent room. The figure stopped. They turned their head, looking straight at me. I couldn't see their face, but I knew they were staring at me, seeing the terror in my eyes. Time seemed to stretch out, every second lasting an eternity as we faced each other in the dark. And then, everything went black. I don't know what happened after that. When I woke up, it was morning, and the window was closed. I was lying in bed, the same as always, but something felt different. I checked the window, the locks, everything. It was all in place, just like it should be. But the feeling of dread lingered, heavier than before. I can't shake the thought that someone was really there, that I wasn't just imagining it. But at the same time, I can't prove it. There are no signs of forced entry, no evidence that anyone was there at all. It's like a bad dream, but it felt so real, too real to just be in my head. Now, every night I go through my routine, locking the doors and windows, but it doesn't help. I still feel like I'm being watched, like someone's out there waiting for the right moment. The fear is always there, just beneath the surface, ready to break through at any moment. I don't know how to make it stop. I don't know if I'm safe anymore. All I know is that the window keeps opening and I keep closing it, hoping that one day it will stay shut and the nightmares will end. But deep down, I know they won't. Because whether it's real or just in my mind, the fear is here to stay. I woke up feeling like I had just taken a nap. My eyes were heavy, my body was sore, but something felt wrong. I checked my phone, expecting to see a few hours had passed, but the date caught my eye. I sat up, heart pounding. How could it be tomorrow? I was sure I went to bed last night, but my phone showed I'd missed an entire day. I scrolled through my notifications, fingers shaking. Missed calls, unread messages, and a few appointments I completely forgot. It didn't make sense. My last clear memory was of getting ready for bed. Nothing unusual, just a normal night. But now, it was a whole day later, and I had no memory of it. Getting out of bed was like moving through thick mud. My body ached, every movement sending a dull pain through my muscles. I pulled up my sleeve and froze. Dark bruises covered my arms, some almost black, others a sickly yellow. They weren't there before. I checked my legs, same thing. It was like someone had beaten me, but there was no pain except for the stiffness. I looked back at my phone, desperate for some clue. I noticed a string of messages from a number I didn't recognize. They were casual, as if from a friend, but I didn't know this person. My mind raced as I read through the messages. Last night was wild, right? Hope you're feeling okay. You sure you're good with this? You're braver than I thought, man. My stomach twisted. Who was this? What did they mean by last night? I didn't remember anything, and the more I thought about it, the more it felt like a bad dream, but the bruises were real, and so were the messages. I tried to calm down, but my thoughts were a mess. I needed to figure out what happened. I started by retracing my steps, but my memory was blank, like someone had wiped it clean. I went through my pockets and found a crumpled receipt from a bar. The name didn't ring any bells. I decided to go there, hoping it might jog something loose. The bar was dark and smelled like stale beer. The bartender barely looked up when I asked him if he remembered me from the night before. He shrugged, uninterested. Yeah, I think you were here. You left with some guy. Looked like you were having a good time. I pressed him for more details, but he couldn't give me much. Just that I'd had a few drinks and left with someone. That was it. No big clue. Nothing to help me piece together the lost time. Just a vague memory from a bartender who probably saw 100 people that night. Back home, I was frustrated and scared. I needed answers, so I checked my phone again, looking for anything I might have missed. In my gallery, there was a video I didn't remember taking. My hands trembled as I played it. The screen showed my face, but I didn't recognize myself. My eyes were wide, darting around like I was scared. My voice was shaky as I spoke, but the words didn't make sense. Is this what you wanted? I don't know if I can do this. I don't remember. Someone off camera responded, but their voice was low, almost like a whisper. Just follow the plan. You wanted this, remember? I didn't. I didn't remember any of it. The video ended abruptly, leaving me staring at the screen, more confused than before. My own face looked strange to me, like it was someone else entirely. And that voice, that person off camera, who were they? The next day, my phone buzzed with a new message from the same unknown number. Meet me at the place we talked about. You know where? I didn't know, but something inside me did. Against my better judgment, I decided to go. Maybe this person had answers. The location turned out to be a secluded spot on the edge of town, near some old abandoned warehouses. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached. Every instinct told me to turn back, but I couldn't. I needed to know what happened to me. A figure stood in the shadows, watching me as I approached. They seemed to know me, but I couldn't place them. They spoke in riddles, never giving a straight answer, only hinting at things I couldn't remember. You were brave to do this, you know. Not many people could handle it. Handle what? I demanded, my voice shaky. What did I do? You wanted this. You agreed to it. Maybe one day you'll remember why. I tried to press them, but they just smiled, a cold, knowing smile, and walked away, leaving me with more questions than answers. I felt sick, my head spinning as I tried to make sense of it all. Back home, I searched my phone again, digging deeper into files I never noticed before. Hidden among them was a folder with a single file. My fingers hovered over it, fear gripping me, but I had to know. The file contained a series of recordings showing me participating in something I couldn't understand. It was like watching a stranger in my own body, doing things I would never do, speaking in ways that didn't sound like me. The final recording ended with me laughing, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was hollow, empty. I realized then that the person I met was someone I should have known, someone close to me, but my mind refused to connect the dots. The more I tried to remember, the more it slipped away, like trying to hold water in my hands. Now I'm left wondering if I'll ever get those memories back, or if it's better that I don't. Whatever happened during that missing time, it's something I'm not sure I want to know. But the bruises are still there, fading slowly, and every time I look at them, I can't help but feel that something inside me is missing too. Something I may never get back. When my son was born, I thought nothing would scare me more than the idea of being a bad mother. But what happened a few months later changed everything. Our house is a bit isolated, surrounded by trees with no close neighbors. At first, this seemed ideal. Peaceful, safe. But after my husband went back to work, leaving me alone with the baby, I started to feel differently. It was too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like you should be hearing something, anything. But there's nothing. The baby monitor became my lifeline. I kept it on all the time, even during the day, just to hear the soft sounds of my baby sleeping, the reassuring rhythm of his breaths. But one night something different came through. It was around 2 a.m. when I first heard it. I was half asleep, and at first I thought it was just static. But then there was a whisper. It was so faint that I wasn't even sure I heard it. I checked the monitor screen, and everything looked normal. My baby was sleeping peacefully, his small chest rising and falling. The room was empty, just as it should be. I told myself it was interference, maybe picking up a radio signal or something like that. I wanted to believe that, so I did. But the next night, it happened again. This time, the whisper was clearer. It wasn't just a sound. It was like a voice, but too soft to understand. I stared at the monitor, my heart pounding in my chest. Again, the room looked empty. No one was there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I went to check on my baby, just to be sure. I tiptoed into his room, holding my breath. Nothing was out of place. He was sleeping, the room was still, but I couldn't shake the unease. Each night, the noises got worse. Whispers turned into quiet murmurs, and I started hearing what sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate. But every time I looked at the monitor, the room was empty. I was barely sleeping, jumping at every little sound, waiting for the next noise. I started to question my own mind. Was I just exhausted? Was I imagining things? Then, one night, I saw it. I was lying in bed, watching the monitor like usual, when I noticed something move. At first, I thought it was a shadow, maybe a trick of the light. But then it happened again, and I saw it more clearly. A figure, just for a second, standing by the crib. My heart nearly stopped. I jumped out of bed, running to my baby's room. But when I got there, the room was empty. The door was locked, the windows were shut, and my baby was still asleep. But I knew what I saw. Someone had been in the room. Someone was coming into my house. The next day, I bought a hidden camera and set it up in the baby's room. I needed proof, something to show the police, to prove that I wasn't losing my mind. That night, I barely slept, too afraid to close my eyes. I watched the monitor all night, waiting. But nothing happened. It wasn't until the next morning when I checked the footage that I saw it. Around 3 a.m., the door to the baby's room slowly opened, and a man walked in. He moved quietly, almost like he knew the house well. He stood by the crib, just watching my baby sleep. He didn't touch him, didn't say anything. He just stood there for what felt like forever, and then he turned and walked out. I felt sick. My hands were shaking as I watched the video over and over. Who was this man? How did he get in? I had locked all the doors, checked all the windows. There was no way he could have gotten in, but he did. I called the police, and when they saw the footage, they recognized the man immediately. He was someone who had been stalking me. They said he had been following me for weeks, maybe longer. The thought of it made my skin crawl. How long had he been watching us? How many nights had he been in my house while we slept? The police arrested him, but it didn't make me feel safer. Even after they installed extra locks and a security system, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching, waiting. I couldn't trust the monitor anymore, but I couldn't stop myself from checking it constantly, every noise making my heart race. Last night, after a few days of quiet, I heard it again. The soft whisper, the faint footsteps. I checked the monitor, but the screen was dark. I ran to the room, my heart pounding. But when I got there, everything was normal. My baby was asleep, the door was locked, and the windows were closed. But I knew what I heard. And now, I'm sitting here, writing this, unable to sleep, wondering if tonight will be the night he comes back. Or maybe he's already here, just waiting for me to let my guard down. title, The Whispering Walls I Needed to Escape. The city was too loud, too stressful, and I couldn't breathe anymore. So when I found a listing for a cabin upstate, I thought it was perfect. The price was low, too low maybe, but I didn't care. I just wanted some peace and quiet, far from everything. The drive was long, but the further I went, the better I felt. The buildings turned into trees and the noise became silence. I followed the owner's directions, turning onto a narrow dirt road. After a few miles, the cabin appeared. It was old, but it looked okay. The wooden walls were weathered, but the roof seemed fine, and the windows were intact. I parked and got out, feeling the cool air on my face. The key was under a stone by the door, just like the owner said. I unlocked the door and it creaked open, loud in the quiet. Inside, the cabin was small but cozy. A kitchen, a living room with a fireplace, and a bedroom. The furniture was old, but it was clean. There were some photos on the mantel, black and white, of people I didn't know. Maybe the previous owners. As I unpacked, I felt uneasy, like someone was watching me. But that was silly, right? I was in the middle of nowhere. There was no one around. I tried to shake it off and decided to explore the area. The woods were dense, the trees tall and close together. I found a small stream not far from the cabin. The water was clear and cold. It was peaceful. Exactly what I needed. But as the sun started to set, the feeling of being watched came back, stronger this time. I hurried back to the cabin, eager to be inside before dark. I lit a fire and tried to read a book, but I couldn't focus. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to move, and the wind outside sounded like it was whispering, just at the edge of hearing. I put the book down and went to make some tea. The kettle took forever to boil, and as I waited, I heard it. A noise, faint at first, like someone whispering. I told myself it was just the wind, but it didn't sound like the wind. It was coming from the walls, low and soft, almost like a voice. My heart started to race, and I felt cold all over. The whispering got louder, filling the room, surrounding me. I couldn't understand what it was saying, but it made me feel sick, like something was crawling inside my mind. I ran out of the cabin, into the night, not caring where I went as long as I was away from that sound. The forest was dark, and I could barely see, but I didn't stop. I didn't know how long I ran, but eventually I realized I was lost. The whispering was still there in my head, no matter how far I went. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. It was inside me, like a parasite feeding on my thoughts. I don't know how, but I ended up back at the cabin. The door was wide open, like it was waiting for me. I didn't want to go inside, but my legs moved on their own. I stepped over the threshold and the door slammed shut behind me. The whispering was louder now, almost deafening. The walls seemed to pulse, alive with the sound. I don't remember much after that. Just flashes. The walls breathing, faces in the wood. Their eyes watching me, following me wherever I went. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I felt trapped, like I was drowning in the noise. When I woke up, it was morning. The sun was shining through the windows, and everything was quiet. Too quiet. I packed my things as fast as I could, not caring if I left something behind. I had to get out, had to leave that place, and never come back. I drove away without looking back, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. Even now, when I'm back home, safe in my own bed, I can still hear it. The whispering, faint but persistent, like a memory that won't fade. I try to tell myself it was all in my head, a result of too much stress, but I know better. The cabin wasn't just a place. It was something else, something that wanted me, something that still does. And I'm afraid that one day I'll hear the whispering again, louder this time, calling me back. And when that happens, I don't know if I'll be able to resist. This story is written in a simple, straightforward style with a focus on building tension and unease. It captures the experience of someone who becomes trapped in their own mind, unable to escape the horror that haunts them.